the double standard, and why it needs to end. 20 years in service, you get both retirement and disability pay. 19 years in a combat injury, you lose one. That's the double standard. The Major Richard Starr Act is Congress's chance to finally end it. All right, vets, let's talk about why this matters. If you're a combat injured veteran who was medically retired before 20 years of service, you've been living this nightmare. You served, you bled, you didn't quit on your country, but the day you were forced to hang up the uniform, the system cut your retirement check in half because you also get VA disability. It's called the offset. Sounds like bureaucratic nonsense because it is. Basically, the law says you can't collect both disability and retirement if you didn't serve a full 20. So you get hurt in combat serving your country, and they say, thanks for your sacrifice, but we owe you less. Who Major Richard Starr was? The bill's named after Major Richard Starr, a combat engineer and Iraq veteran who was medically retired after a cancer diagnosis linked to burn pit exposure. He spent his last years fighting for the men and women who came home injured and then got financially penalized for it. Major Starr passed in 2021, but his mission didn't. This act carries his name because it carries his fight, restoring the pay and dignity that combat injured vets earned. Breaking down the problem. Here's how messed up it is right now. If you retire after 20 years of service and get a VA rating over 50%, you qualify for concurrent retirement and disability pay, CRDP. You get both checks. Simple. But if you were injured in combat and forced out before 20, your retirement pay gets slashed by the amount of your VA disability compensation. That means a Marine blown up in Fallujah after 10 years of service can lose hundreds, sometimes thousands every month. The guy who stayed safe stateside for 20 keeps both checks. Tell me how that makes sense? Spoiler, it doesn't. What the act would do. The Major Richard Starr Act would end that offset for combat injured vets. It would let you receive your full military retirement pay and your VA disability compensation at the same time. No strings attached, no math tricks. It's not new money. It's restoring what should have been yours in the first place. So why is this still a bill and not law? Money. Budget scores say it costs billions over 10 years. But that's Congress speak, for we don't want to prioritize it. What they don't count are the lives improved, the families stabilized, and the morale it builds for the next generation of troops who see how we treat the wounded. The fight for this act is a fight for fairness, period. In the next half of the video, we're diving into how the current offset system actually works, the numbers, the fine print, and the real world impact on veterans who've been living this for years. Because once you see how the math steals from those who bled, you'll understand why the Major Richard Starr Act isn't about politics. It's about justice. Inside the offset, how the current law shortchanges combat injured veterans. All right, vets, you've heard me say offset about a dozen times. Let's rip that term apart because this is the fine print trick that's been cutting combat injured paychecks for decades. What the offset actually is. When you retire for service length, you get military retirement pay. When you get hurt and earn VA disability compensation, you get that too. But the law says you can't collect both if you didn't hit 20 years. So the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, DFAS, offsets your retirement by subtracting the amount of VA comp. If your disability pay equals or exceeds your retirement drops to zero. Let that sink in. You lose the retirement you earn because you were injured serving your country. Who it hits the hardest. This rule crushes Chapter 61 retirees, the ones medically retired before 20 years. Example, a soldier does 12 years, gets wounded in Iraq, and medically retires with 50% disability. Their retirement might be $1,500 a month. Their VA disability is $1,800. DFAS offsets that $1,500 against the $1,800. So they get only the VA check, zero retirement. Meanwhile, someone who makes it to 20 gets both checks in full. Same injuries, different math. That's why vets call it a penalty for getting hurt too soon. How the law got here. The offset comes from a 1950s law meant to prevent double dipping. The idea that you shouldn't be paid twice for the same service. That logic might have made sense in a paper check era, but it's nonsense today. Disability comp is for injury, retirement pay is for service. Two different things, two different reasons. The major Richard Starr Act would finally acknowledge that truth. The real world impact. This isn't theoretical. Ask any medically retired vet trying to support a family. That offset can mean $20,000 to $30,000 a year gone. It's mortgage money, college money, therapy money, just erased. Some vets work second jobs to replace it. Others can't work at all because of their injuries. The system forces them to choose between health and survival. That's why the STAR Act is a big deal. It doesn't add benefits, it restores what was taken. All right, vets, now that we've covered the offset and how it screws combat injured retirees, let's talk about the fight to fix it. Because the major Richard Starr Act didn't just pop up out of thin air, it's been introduced, reintroduced, and dragged through committee halls for years. And it's time we understand where it stands and how to keep it alive. Where the bill stands today. The Act, H.R. 1282 in the House and S. 344 in the Senate, has gained serious momentum. As of this year, more than 320 representatives and 70 senators have signed on as co-sponsors. That's huge. That's bipartisan support. It's rare when DC agrees on anything, but they agree this injustice needs to end. The holdup? It's not politics, it's budget math. The Congressional Budget Office says it'll cost billions over 10 years. But let's be real, that's pennies compared to what's wasted elsewhere. You can't put a price tag on fairness. Who's leading the charge? Here's who's in the trenches fighting for this. Military Officers Association of America, MOAA, leading advocacy and lobbying on the Hill. Wounded Warrior Project, DAV, VFW, EANGUS, and IAVA, all backing the bill publicly. State-level veteran councils pushing their reps to co-sponsor. And it's not just the big organizations, it's everyday veterans sending emails, making calls, and showing up. This is a grassroots fight fueled by frustration and unity. The same energy that passed the PACT Act is driving this one. Who's dragging their feet? Let's call it straight. Some lawmakers are sitting on the fence because of the price tag or fear of setting a precedent. Others argue that since retirement and disability are both federal benefits, they shouldn't overlap. That's the same tired argument that's been used for decades to justify taking money from wounded veterans. But you and I know better. Disability isn't a paycheck, it's compensation for what you lost. And retirement isn't a gift, it's earned through service and sacrifice. If you're watching this and your member of Congress isn't a co-sponsor, it's time to make noise. How veterans can push it forward. This is where you come in. Here's what you can do right now that moves the needle. Find your lawmakers at congress.gov. Search Major Richard Starr Act. Check if your representative and senators are on the co-sponsor list. If they're not, contact them. Call, email, tag them on social media. Tell them to support HR 1282/S344. Tell your story. Numbers don't move Congress, stories do. Share the mission. The more awareness this gets in the veteran community, the harder it is for Congress to ignore. We've seen it before. The PACT Act, concurrent receipt for 20-year retirees, all of it happened because veterans got loud and stayed loud. All right, vets, We've talked about the injustice, the offset, and the fight to fix it. Now let's picture what happens when the Major Richard Starr Act becomes law. Because this isn't just numbers, it's food on the table, dignity restored, and proof that this community can still move mountains. The payoff. When the act passes, tens of thousands of combat injured vets who were medically retired before 20 years finally get both checks, their full military retirement pay and their full VA disability compensation. That could mean hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars a month back in pockets where it always belonged. It's the difference between scraping by and breathing room, between putting off therapy and finally paying for it, between wondering if your service mattered and seeing the government finally act like it did. The ripple effect. This bill isn't just a paycheck fix, it rebuilds trust. When Congress keeps a promise to the wounded, it reminds every young service member that the country won't forget them if things go sideways downrange. Families win too, spouses, kids, caregivers, because financial stability at home means stability everywhere else. That ripple hits morale, recruitment, and retention. It tells the next generation, you'll be taken care of if you get hurt doing your job. Accountability and follow through. When it passes, that's not the finish line. The VA and DFAS will need months to implement payments and adjust systems. That means veterans need to stay vigilant, check letters, monitor pay statements, and report discrepancies. We fought to get this law. We'll have to make sure it's executed right. If you've learned anything from this process, it's that the squeaky wheel gets the rating fixed, the claim moved, and the check corrected. The bigger mission. This is more than a bill. It's proof that veteran voices still move Congress. We did it with the PACT Act. We're doing it with the STAR Act. And we'll keep doing it until no veteran is shorted for their sacrifice. That's the power of staying informed, staying loud, and helping each other navigate a system that's built on persistence. If you're 100% P and T in transition or still fighting through your first claim, remember this. You're part of a community that doesn't quit. So here's the bottom line. The Major Richard Starr Act is about justice, not generosity. It's about giving back what combat injured veterans already earned, their full pay and their full respect. When that check hits, remember Major Richard Starr, the man who fought this fight while fighting cancer from burn pit exposure. Remember every veteran who signed petitions, sent emails, and refused to stay quiet. You served, you earned it, and we're not done until every veteran sees it in writing and in their bank account. Stay informed, share this video with another vet, and let's finish this mission together.